Good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for being with us this morning. We're very pleased to have you here. It's always good to welcome our Polk County students over to this campus. It's always good to see you in your space. We're just so glad to be a part of the work together in helping you achieve your goals. I'm Margaret Annunziata. I have the great honor of being the president here at Isothermal Community College. And this morning, I am especially excited to introduce you to our speaker. Ron Harrill is a historian, author, and lecturer on the history of Africa and the African people. He's the author of 3 books, 3 plays, and over 200 poems. He has written an international award-winning book, Makeda, Queen Sheba, and his latest historical-based book, Children of Genesis, The Black Nations in the Old Testament, continues to gain popularity. His books are published under his company, R. Harrill Enterprises, Incorporated, and he's traveled to West Africa, North Africa, and Israel for study and research. Ron currently serves on the board of directors for Cleveland County United Way and Community Math Academy, Incorporated. He's previously served as a board member and chairperson of the Cleveland County Arts Council, located in Shelby. A graduate of North Carolina A&T State University, he worked in banking for 33 years for the former Wachovia Bank, now Wells Fargo, in Charlotte before retiring. And I just have to ask you, how many bankers do you know that have written over 200 poems? That's remarkable to me. My father was a banker, and I can assure you, he recited a few poems, but he never wrote one. He's also a graduate of the BAI School for Banking, held at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Ron is married to Denise Harrill, and they reside in Shelby and are proud parents of 3 sons. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Ron Harrill.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? It's a pleasure to be here. I just want to thank the college, the faculty. I really appreciate the invitation to be here. I'm going to go through some information, but yes, I do write books, and I don't talk about them enough, but I'll just hold them up real quick. I majored in accounting, but now I write books. So the thing there is you can be versatile. You can just do whatever you want to do. And, but I did spend 33 years in banking, but that's a whole different part of my life. But this is the first book I wrote. This is a book called Makeda, the Queen of Sheba, the biblical character who went to see Solomon. So I wrote this book first, and I usually hire people. I hire the artists and the editors, and I hire them on a contract basis to come and work for my company, and then we put the books together, and then we move on. So this is the first book I wrote. It did really well. I like it. You should always like your first book, like your first child. You should, they're special. This is the second book I wrote. It's also called Makeda, the Queen of Sheba. It's a remake of that book, but this book, I hired a different team. I kept the same editor because I really like my editor. He's really, really, really good. He's a former newspaper journalist, so he's really into words and things. But this book won first place in a big-time international competition. We entered it, and I didn't know what we were going to do, but we did win. And this is an international competition against writers from all over the world, not just American writers. So this book is kind of my favorite. It's the second book, okay? And my latest book is this one. This is the one that's kind of climbing a little bit. And I'm lecturing on this book, Children of Genesis, a whole lot right now. So those are the 3 books. And I do publish the books under my own company. And it's important, just like writers, if you ever like songwriters, it's important to keep the rights to anything that you write, anything that you create. Any of you, if you're songwriters, whatever, it's important to always try to keep the rights to whatever, because you just never know when your work may explode and you might be it. So it's important. So that's why I formed my own company so that I could control it, not the word control, but it would be published and the way that, that I like it. Now, my publisher is in Wisconsin, same publisher that publishes Diary of the Wimpy Kids and those types of books. So my publisher's in Stevens Point, Wisconsin, and my distributor is in New Hampshire, and I'm here. So we just work. That's just the way technology works today. So you don't have to be physically in a certain place. But today, so now that I've talked about those, I put those on the floor. I'm here to talk about, it's what's considered Black History Month, but it's really the missing pages of history. That's really what it is. And all of my books are written on people and places from the ancient world. I don't really write books on anything in the modern world. All of my books are before the birth of Christ because that's my specialty, is the old ancient history. But today I'm going to do a lecture that, it's a lecture that I've done for 4 or 5, maybe 10 years, but for some reason it's a hot lecture this year and I'm getting a lot of requests on it. It's a missing piece of American history that we really need to maybe slow down and appreciate more. It's a group called the legendary Buffalo Soldiers. They were a group of cavalry troops on the western frontier in the old what we call the Wild West days. So I'm going to take you through their life. Now today, we're here to learn, and sometimes history has sections that make us all feel a little bit uncomfortable, but that's just what history does. History's objective is to be a teacher. So history, sometimes we're happy, sometimes we're not, sometimes we're comfortable, and sometimes we're not comfortable with the information, but you have to deal with the truth. So we're on a journey today. As I speak about these legendary, and the Buffalo Soldiers were all Black cavalry troops. We're not here to do anything like a pity party or woe is me or somebody did somebody wrong or something like that. We're just here for you to learn, because my desire as a writer is to help improve humanity, because I hope that your generation is the best generation we've ever created in America. I'm really hoping, and I hope that you want to be the very best, the very best caring, sharing, and equipped generation that we've ever had. So that's where we are today. This month, oh man, I've been lecturing so much, sometimes I don't quite know where I am. I know I've got 2 or 3 more lectures I've got to do this week, but I was so glad to get the invitation to come here. The trigger behind me coming here, I don't know if Vanessa Cannon is still here, but she and I go to church together in Shelby. She was the catalyst, so that's why I'm here. Now, the Buffalo Soldiers, I got to take you back to right after the end of the Civil War. We're in the year 1866, so if you can transition, the Civil War has ended. We're in the year 1866, and the United States, or America, is trying to come back together after all of this turmoil. So this is where we were in terms of military in 1866. Due to the heavy losses when the Union Army was against the Confederate Army, the Union Army made a critical decision in the middle of that Civil War, and their critical decision was, we've got to let Black soldiers come in to the Union Army because we're losing so many soldiers, and we don't have enough soldiers to continue this war, and the Blacks are petitioning us over and over to come and serve America, to come and help defend the flag. So as a result of that, 180,000 Black soldiers actually served in the Union Army during the Civil War, and people can't realize 180,000, yes, 180,000 Black soldiers actually served during the Civil War for the Union. 37,300 Black soldiers died during the Civil War, and people don't understand that they paid a heavy toll just like everybody else on both sides of the Civil War. There was a heavy toll in the South, the North, and everywhere. But yes, 37,300 Black soldiers gave their lives during the during the war. Now, here's the dilemma. After the end of the war, during peaceful times, on the Senate floors of our Senate and our Congress, there was a heavy debate. What are we going to do with the black soldiers in peaceful times? We needed them during the war, but what are we going to do now? And this is the debate that happened in Washington, D.C. among our Congress people in 1866. There was one group that says, no, black soldiers are not worthy to be soldiers anymore. We don't want them. They're not worthy. And there was another group of senators that said, no, wait a minute. Look at everything that they've done. Look at how they serve just like everybody else. All they want to do is just put on the uniform. There was intense debates. And here is the criteria that, and especially a lot, I'm Southern, I'm born Southern, so I'm going to tell you what the Southern senators did. The Southern senators had a petition that blacks were not worthy to serve in the military during peaceful times. And this is the criteria that they used for their petition. They said black men do not have the courage, they do not have the intelligence, they do not have the disciplines, they do not have the morals or the aptitude to become soldiers. Now that's the heavy debate that went amongst our congressmen on the fate of black men serving in the military. Those are some heavy things to lay out there, but that is what happened. So there was a compromise finally reached in late 1866, and this is what the United States Congress said. Okay, we will let blacks serve in the military, but there's got to be 3 or 4 conditions that go with them to serve. Number one is the troops have to be fully segregated. They cannot mix with white troops. That was the first thing. The second thing was all of the officers have to be white. Now, I don't want y'all to feel uptight about this. This is stuff that you need to learn so that you can be better as adults. The second one was all of the officers had to be white. And the third was the white officers had to have Civil War experience so that they could be seasoned and veterans. So those were the 3 criteria that the United States government set up for blacks to be allowed to be in the military. So in 1866, the United States Senate reached this compromise that they would set up all black cavalry troops to serve in the West. The West was expanding, the West was growing, and they needed troops out there. So they decided to establish the 9th Cavalry and the 10th Cavalry and 4 regiment units. But we're only going to talk today about the 9th Cavalry and the 10th Cavalry. So the 9th and the 10th were formed in 1866. The 9th Cavalry was sent to Greenville, Louisiana for their basic training, their early training, and the 10th Cavalry was sent to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas for their training. So the 9th went to Louisiana, the 10th Cavalry was sent to Fort Leavenworth. Now, what kind of men served? Now, once those signs and those posts went up that blacks could enlist in the United States military, there was a barrage, there was just a floodgate of black men trying to join. Why? Because you've got to remember now, we're talking 1867, a couple of years after slavery. A lot of black men had never had jobs like this. They had never seen this kind of freedom before. And a lot of men wanted to serve the United States government in the military just to become part of American mainstream. Just like all of us, just like our families. We just want to be part of America. Doesn't matter what color you are, that's what you want to do. So a lot of the men, ex-slaves, ex-farmers, ex-whatevers, they were signing up to become part of the military. Now, with the white officers, initially, a lot of the white officers refused. They said, there's no way we're going to serve because it may tarnish our reputations. It may put a damper on our promotion abilities, and we may get this negative peer pressure from our friends, other white officers, if we join those. So initially, it didn't happen. But gradually, a lot of white officers who had served in the Union Army said it would be an honor to serve because they said, we have seen black men as being soldiers, so it would be an honor to serve with them because we served with them in the Union. So gradually, they got enough officers to fulfill that second requirement. But here's another obstacle. So we're gonna be talking about obstacles that they face today, and the message to you is I want you to learn how they face their obstacles. They never ran away from any of their obstacles, and they never complained about stuff that people complain about. Now, a big obstacle hit the white officers when they started working there with their men, and this was the obstacle. They quickly realized that of all of those men who had enlisted, almost 90% of them were illiterate. They were illiterate. They could not read and they could not write. And people sometimes, when I give this speech, they go like, what in the world are you talking about? You've got to remember, this is 1867. This is 2 years after the abolishment of slavery. In the South, all of the southern states had laws that prohibited slaves, and any nice white person who wanted to teach a slave would be punished if they were even caught teaching a slave how to read or write. All of the southern states, including North Carolina passed their law in 1830, prohibiting anybody from teaching a slave how to read or write. So don't gawk at the fact that these men couldn't read or write, because it's just 2 years after slavery. So one of the biggest obstacles for the white officers was, what are we going to do? We're just not used to this kind of environment. So a lot of the chaplains joined these brave white officers and said, we'll do the best. Chaplains, y'all teach reading and writing when you can. Some of the northern troops that had been able to read or write were now re-enlisting in the 9th and the 10th. They volunteered. So just want to let you know, it was just kind of rocky to get the 9th and the 10th even started. So the first year was a little rough. High rate of desertion, didn't go that well, but the 9th and the 10th, the men kept working, and they kept, because their only desire was to prove to the United States Congress that they were worthy of being soldiers. That was the chip on their shoulders, was they knew that they had to prove. So the 9th and the 10th kept working. In 1867, both the 9th and the 10th got their official marching orders. They had graduated from training camp, and now the United States said, we're going to deploy you out. We're sending you where we want to send you. The 9th was sent to Texas, to the Rio Grande area, and the 10th was sent to further commission and work on all of the Kansas, Oklahoma, the Dakotas, places like that, what they call the plains, the Great Plains areas. Now the 9th, we're going to talk a little bit about the 9th. When the 9th was sent to Texas, Texas was the meanest, roughest, most chaotic, brutal part of the Wild West was Texas, the Rio Grande, Texas. All of the records show that was the one place that you didn't want to be assigned to, was the Rio Grande region of Texas. But that's where the 9th had to go to. Now the 10th, when they went to Kansas and Oklahoma. Now, if you ever visit Kansas or Oklahoma, you will see, especially in Fort Leavenworth and in some of the forts in Oklahoma, you will see these shrines and these statues that are in place now dedicated to the Buffalo Soldiers. So Google those if you want to, statues, shrines, and as I speak a little bit, you'll probably get a feeling on why they have those statues out there. Now, the 10th, this is what their initial assignments were starting in 1867. The 10th was initially assigned to protect the railroad workers, because the Kansas Pacific Railroad was being built, and it's not like what you see in them Hollywood movies where you see all these great, wonderful white troops in those Hollywood movies doing all that great stuff. A lot of that stuff was done by the Buffalo Soldiers. Now, how did they get this name, the Buffalo Soldiers? Out in Kansas and Oklahoma, the Native Americans, who sometimes called the Indians, when they went to combat and battle with the Buffalo Soldiers, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, the Native Americans are the ones who came up with the name Buffalo Soldier, because the Native Americans said, in their opinion, the black soldiers, the curly kinks, short hair on our head, looked just like the hair on the back of the buffalo, on the back of the buffalo's neck. And the buffalo was a proud animal to the Native Americans, but they said our hair looked just like the texture of the hair on the back of the neck of the proud buffalo. So that is where the 10th Cavalry received the name. Out of recognition and somewhat pride from the Native Americans, they called them Buffalo Soldiers. The 10th Cavalry took that name so much as pride, they put it in their insignia on their uniform, and later the 9th Cavalry officially adopted the name Buffalo Soldier too. So that's how they became Buffalo Soldiers. But here are the duties that the 10th had to do. Out in Kansas and Oklahoma, they had to deal with the cattle rustlers, the outlaws, unfortunately the Native Americans who were only just trying to protect their land, the Mexican revolutionaries, all of those groups they had to interact with. They had to protect many of those towns and those new settlements as they were building those towns and building those settlements. And one thing that they definitely did a lot of was they escorted and protected those wagon trains. So that's another thing. When you look at those Hollywood movies and they have nothing but the white cavalry troops, that is definitely not true. The military records, and I use William Leckey's book for my lecture. This is a white cavalry soldier who spent 10 years of his life dedicated to researching the military records of the Buffalo Soldiers in the history military archives. And all of the information of his book, I can't thank him enough for spending all his time writing this book, but everything that I lecture on comes from his book because it comes from the military records. Now, they escorted so many wagon trains across those Great Plains because that was one of their official duties. Initially, they weren't sent into combat. They had all of these other duties. And another thing they did, the Buffalo Soldiers were great at building forts. They built a lot of those forts in the western frontier. They just could build forts, just like nobody else could build them. So they were doing all of those things, and they were helping the surveyors and the people who were exploring the Old West. So all of those things that we take for granted that somebody did, they did them. Now, the Badlands up in the Dakotas. Now, one thing about you, I've got to purposely, I can't tell you too much about some of the fierce fighting and the combats because, Principal, I can't do that. This is just not the time to talk heavily about guns and violence. So I'll tell you a little bit, but due to society right now, it's just not the time to accentuate all of the battles that they were in. But believe me, they were in a lot of battles. Now, one thing about the Dakotas, the United States government was having problems with the U.S. mail because the U.S. mail carriers were just being eliminated, killed, carrying the U.S. mail. Now, so the United States government said, okay, we'll get our soldiers to do the mail. So at first they sent the white cavalry troops, and about 8 months later, the white cavalry troops said, we don't want to carry the mail in the Badlands because it's just too violent and we just can't do it. So the mail carriers couldn't do it. The white troops wouldn't do it. Then the government said, well, we only have one group left, and it's got to be the Buffalo Soldiers. So they told the Buffalo Soldiers, you're going to have to carry the U.S. mail in the Badlands, and you got to make it. So for about a year or two, the Buffalo Soldiers became the United States mail carriers up in the Dakotas. Now, one story that I always have to tell is a young private. They don't think he was more than 20 or 21 years old. His name was Fillmore Roberts. And Fillmore Roberts, in the dead of winter. It was in Kansas, and he was told, not to the Dakotas, there was some absolute confidential information that had to get to Fort Gibson. I think it's in Oklahoma. You've got to, because this is confidential, secret stuff. So he left out in the dead of winter with this mail in one of those sealed things. But Fillmore Roberts never made it to Fort Gibson. And it was devastating to the United States government, to the fact that he was officially declared a deserter. And they were really, really kind of disappointed that he didn't fulfill that. Well, in the spring, on a scouting trip, some soldiers were crossing a river. And this is after the snows were down and the river had subsided in the late spring. And they came across this body that was wedged in, you know how trees get stuck in the river sometimes. So they came across this body. They knew it was a military body, they could tell. And so they went to rescue the soldier because they knew he'd been in there quite a while. But then they noticed that he had this special U.S. mail strap, and it was tied around his neck and underneath his shoulders. And eventually, they were able, because of the contents and the insignia, they identified that was Fillmore Roberts, and they figured he had tried to cross that swollen river in the dead of winter with all of those creeks up and everything, trying to get that mail across, but he just didn't make it. So the strap was still across his neck, under his shoulder. He tried, he just couldn't do it. But now, I'm switching to the 9th Calvary, going back to Texas, in the rough, tough, chaotic Rio Grande. The 9th Cavalry had to spend 8 years in this area, and it was fierce battles, one after another after another. The thing about the Rio Grande was, it was so chaotic. After being there 2 or 3 years, they noticed something. The white troops they would rotate them out every 2 years. So white troops would go into the Rio Grande, they would stay for 2 years, and then they would switch them out, and then another cavalry troop would come in. But the Buffalo Soldiers were never switched out. They had to stay there for 8 consecutive years, and they were denied their furloughs to go home. That means you get to go home after 2 or 3 or 4 years, just to see your family. That's what happens in the military. But the 9th Cavalry was denied their furloughs. Now, by 1872, the 9th Cavalry, being in Texas for 4.5 years, this is what the military records of the United States government described the 9th Cavalry. They described the 9th Cavalry as one of the hardest hitting military fighting machines in Texas. So remember now, in 1866, they didn't have courage, they didn't have bravery, they didn't have intelligence, they didn't have the discipline, they didn't have any of those things. Within 4 or 5 years, they had switched from what those senators thought to now becoming an absolute elite military fighting machine, one of the best in Texas. In 1873, the commanders in Texas said the 9th Cavalry is equal to or better than any white cavalry troop in Texas. So that's, if you work hard, if you put the effort in, if you deal with your obstacles, and if you keep working hard every day, and you just lock in that you just got to make it, look at where they came from, okay? In 1866, the Senate called them an experiment. They were called on the Senate floor, okay, we'll pass this bill, but this is an experiment. In 1873, they are called an elite, the finest group in the state of Texas. Now, here's a couple of letters I'm going to read to you about what the military officers wrote back to the United States government that are in the archive records. This is a letter from 1870 from a Captain Carpenter at Camp Supply. Now, one thing about them, all 8 years in Texas, the 9th Cavalry received second-rate horses, second-rate supplies, second-rate food, second-rate ammunition. They never received the same level of supplies, food, ammunition that the white troops received. They just never, ever, because the United States government never saw them equal to the white troops, so they were always getting secondary things. So here's a couple of letters to confirm how they were treated. In 1870, this is what Captain Carpenter wrote. He says, "I have inspected the conditions surrounding the 9th Cavalry, and I'm filing this report. This cavalry is only getting old and mean and worn out horses. These are definitely throwaway horses from the favorite white 7th Cavalry. Some of these horses die within days of even reaching our post. Since the first mounts of 1867 until now, our cavalry has received nothing but broken down horses, old repaired equipment. I am willing to testify fully to these injustices." Now, that's what one of the official reports. This is what Captain Ed Hatch, who was over the 10th Cavalry, reported about the conditions in Fort Leavenworth in Kansas. He says, "Upon arrival, I found the morale and the spirit high among the troops, although they had too many new recruits that were still in training. But I reviewed the equipment and the horses, and I was shocked at what I saw. Most of the horses were cast-offs. Of the 48 horses I looked at of the F Company, 45 of these 48 horses were definitely 15 years or older. Yet these troops take care of these ancient animals as if they're newborn babies. Most of their artillery was so old that I personally would not fire it. Captain Kennedy's men in the G Company were undersupplied with ammunition, too low of their ammunition. I will come to Congress and witness what I saw," signed Ed Hatch. Now, by 1870, the same group of men that were considered not worthy of even being soldiers, a fellow by the name of Emanuel Stance. I like Emanuel Stance, and I'm not picking on him. He was only 5 feet tall. I'm not that tall either. He had the short man's complex. He did. Emanuel Stone, he could read and write because he was from Louisiana, so he was moved up quickly. By this time, he was a sergeant. But Emanuel Stance, he just liked battles for some reason. He just liked battles. But his record of bravery was so strong that in 1870, Emanuel Stance was given the United States Congressional Medal of Honor. Now, what is the Congressional Medal of Honor? That's the highest honor you can get for military service, okay? So you got to think about this. These are men who were not even considered anything but an experiment. Now they're beginning to win the highest medal within 3 years that you can even win, the Congressional Medal of Honor. So he won it in 1870. Following him, Sergeant Moses Williams and Private Augusta Wallace were given the Congressional Medal of Honor. 14 Buffalo soldiers won the highest medal that you can get out there on those western plains, the United States Medal of Honor. So once again, what they had to go through and everything that they had to endure, and now they're becoming part of the elite of the elitists. That's why it's important to tell their history. It's not about woe is me. It's not about how somebody have mercy on me or whatever. It's about how these men faced their obstacles, knew what the government thought of them, knew what the military thought of them, and they pushed forward each and every day, working and working and working. Now, I'm going to give you a snapshot of a military report that happened in the 1880s. If you ever look at those Western movies where they have the big payrolls on those stagecoaches, and everybody knows that the stagecoach is hauling the payroll, because I guess that's how everybody got paid. They didn't have checks, electronic banking, and stuff like that. They just hauled it on these payroll wagons. So in the late 1870s, this is what happened with one of the official reports. This payroll wagon got ambushed, and they got ambushed by it was Mexican revolutionaries, white outlaws, Native Americans. They wanted that gold on that payroll. They caught them in a blind spot, and they just attacked it. But according to the official reports of the paymaster who survived the attack, this is what he wrote in his report. He says, I'm filing this report, and again, I can't go into some of the details are kind of rough. He says, as the pay wagon driver, I'm filing this report. I too was in the Civil War, and I fought with General Grant, and I was in 16 different battles with General Grant. He says, but I tell you, I never, and I mean I never witnessed better courage or better fighting as shown by these Buffalo soldiers in May of 1880. Signed J.W. Wham, and this was included in the file for Sergeant Benjamin Brown, 9th Calvary, who also won the Congressional Medal of Honor. So, where's the time clock? Okay, I say, because I know y'all got to get back to school. What time is it? Okay, all right, because I know you got to get back to school because school is really important. I just want to paint the picture of what it means and what it meant to these men to wear that uniform. That was their only desire, was everything that they did and every sacrifice is documented. Why did you do that? I just wanted to do it because I wanted to be part of the American military, and I wanted to wear that uniform proudly. The 9th Cavalry sometimes went to cities and towns in Texas where the townspeople didn't even like them. They let them know, oh, we thought they were sending white troops. We never thought they were sending black troops. And they would tell them, we don't even want you in our town. You can't go in the saloons. You can't go in the general store. We don't want you here, even though you came to protect us. Even though you came to protect us, we do not want you in our towns. And you know, as a military person, you're trying to do what the military says is your oath, and you got all these kind of little obstacles that you still got to deal with. You got all these enemies and all of these opponents and all these things you have to go with, and then you've got people that are also Americans telling you that you're not wanted in their towns, even though within a couple of days, if they are attacked, you will have to defend that town, even though that town doesn't want you in there. So that did happen to them. Now, from 1867 to 1873, the military records show that the 9th Cavalry in Texas encountered 5 of the hardest, most difficult years of any cavalry troop in our history. 5 consecutive years of just rough, tough work. They were asked to do more, and the better they got, the more they were penalized because the government gave them more to do. So once they became elite, they got more, would give them more, give them more, give them more, give them more. So they paid a heavy price for being that good. From 1873 to 1877, the military records officially show that the 9th and 10th had outstanding and faithful records. They had one of the lowest desertion rates because out in the Old West, men would desert It was there. I mean, they just did it. They don't say it on TV, but the desertion rates were really, really prevalent. The 9th Cavalry established the all-time record for the 10th Cavalry, established the all-time record for the lowest number of official desertions in a calendar year. It belonged to the 10th Cavalry, the Black Cavalry. Now, in 1870, Captain Morrow, he wrote this report because he had pushed the 9th Cavalry so hard in Texas. He had pushed them so hard, he wrote this report. He says, to the men of the 9th Cavalry, for over months, you had to march for about 1,000 miles of rugged terrain, and the last 200 miles were unknown territories to us American soldiers. I cannot speak too highly of the conduct of the men under my command. Always cheerful, always ready, braving the severest hardships, always with short food supplies. These soldiers know no fear. Now check out what he said. These soldiers know no fear and are capable of great endurance. Signed, Captain Morrow, April 1870. So in these archive records, and I don't have time to go through all of them, are letter after letter after letter. Now, I can't tell you about the fighting too much, but I can tell you what the military records say. They don't understand why, and they don't understand how, but the 9th and the 10th Cavalry lost just very few battles. When they were in battle, they rarely lost battles. There is some speculation that they just felt a chip on their shoulder, that if they did lose the battles, that America and the senators would say, okay, we told you so. So they had an unusually high record of victory in battles, not matched by the 7th Cavalry, which was General Custer's cavalry, and the 4th Cavalry. So they rarely lost battles, and they had this thing, and I don't know why, and I have asked military, they had this code that they just wouldn't retreat. No matter what it was, no matter how, if they were outnumbered, they just had a code of conduct. We just can't retreat. We will not retreat. So again, it's in their records that they would battle and battle and battle. They had failures. They weren't angels or anything like that, but they were determined. They were absolutely determined to show America and to show the Congress that they were able and fit. They served on the Western frontier for 24 consecutive years, 1867 to 1891, and then the Buffalo Soldiers continued all the way through World War I. I just don't lecture on them, so they were still together. Now, this is what William Leckey wrote after all of his years of research in the U.S. military records. He says, you can search the dusty archives of all of these military records in vain, and you cannot find instances where a detachment, a company, a battalion, or a regiment of Buffalo Soldiers ran away or failed to do their battle duties. And that's what he says. You won't find them. They would not run away, and they did not shirk doing their duties. Their records deserve more attention than they've gotten. They are in the dusty archives as we promote the white cavalry troops. He says, in the final analysis, the 9th and the 10th Cavalry were first-rate regiments and major forces in promoting peace and the advancement of the frontiers. And once again, I wish things had not happened to Native Americans in their lands. I just wish that hadn't happened. But the truth is, it is history, so we just have to tell about it. He says, these men face their problems, and I hope you face your problems the same way. Head on, never ducking away, never overly whining or complaining. They achieve high-level performance based on their dedication, their skills, their unity, and their teamwork. So in summary, this is just a lesson that if we gave you lessons to round you out to let you see all of the dimensions of America and all of the history of America, just to make you better and make you feel better, not to make you feel one way negative, one way uncomfortable, but just to make you understand that history is what history is, and we need to embrace all of history. So I applaud you for being here. I thank you for taking out your day, because I know your days are important, and I hope that you understand a little more. I hope you go back and Google the Buffalo Soldier shrines and just look at the ones in Fort Leavenworth and Fort Sill. Just Google them, because if you ever go, and I haven't been to all of those places, but if you ever go to the Midwest, these guys are serious out there. Over here, we don't talk about them, but in the Midwest and the Plains, oh yeah, they're legendary. They have museums and all kinds of things. So take it upon yourself to do that, and I trust that your journey's on education. I just trust that you, like them, just do your best. The world drives off effort. That's what the world drives. You don't have to be an A student, but the world drives off effort. Effort. So just give the effort. So I want to thank you again for inviting me, and I want to thank you for coming.